Hey Green Acres, it's January 14th. That means we're reading John chapter 12 today. Now, John chapter 12 tells us a lot of things, and it gives us kind of a closure on a big part of Jesus's life. So let's kind of dive right in there. We can see that at the very beginning, Jesus returns back to Bethany, where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, the same Lazarus that he just raised not too long ago, he returns there for a meal, probably a feast to celebrate the resurrecting of Lazarus. But we are told there that it is 6 days before he dies. So this is the last we're starting the last week of his life. And it's just interesting to know that we're only in John chapter 12. Over half of John is about the last week of Jesus's life. Where the others, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, may be a third and less than a third of those other books. So John spends a significant amount of time about that last week of Jesus's life, which is really starting today and will continue through the end of the book of John. So they go to have this meal. They're there like normal. Martha is serving, she's working. Mary anoints his feet. And we can see that Judas gets upset because basically he thinks it's a waste of money. And we can see that this amount of ointment is worth 300 denarii, which a denarii is a day's wage. So for many of us, we would just say it was worth a year's salary. So whatever you make in a year, that's what Mary did. That's what she anointed Jesus with, and that's what she wanted to do. And we can see that after that, right, a lot of the Jews come to Lazarus' house because they heard about Lazarus, they heard Jesus was there, and now not only do they want to kill Jesus, but they also want to kill Lazarus too because he's been resurrected, because people are seeing him and believing him and becoming Christians, and so they want to kill Lazarus also. And then we move on to the triumphal entry, Jesus kind of roaming in. Now, I know the other Gospels spend a great deal amount of time of this, but you can just tell in John's writing, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that important to John's story, right? That he rides in, people says Hosanna and Hosanna, but we know from the other Gospels that when he arrives in Jerusalem, people just say, "Who is this guy?" And they simply walk away, right? The people are followers, and so they saw this, they heard the crowds, they kept doing it, but really nobody knew who he was in Jerusalem. But what's interesting, starting in verse 20, is that we see that some Greeks are now coming to Jesus, Gentiles. Okay, so it says Greeks, but it's Gentiles, people who are not Jewish. And so they come to the disciples and say, "Hey, we want to see this Jesus guy. We want to talk to Jesus." And the disciples kind of talk amongst themselves, and of course they will take them to Jesus. And Jesus is like, "Well, of course they are, right? My hour has come," right? And he talks about this wheat. The seed must fall into the ground. Something must die so something can grow, right? The reality is Christianity is as big as it is because the death of Jesus. He was that seed into the ground and caused a growth, an explosion, a growth that the disciples yet didn't know, but they're going to find shortly after, just really 45 days after Jesus's resurrect, or after Jesus ascends. They have Pentecost, and then they kind of go on this huge scene of evangelizing not only Jewish people but Gentiles. And then Paul takes that a step further and goes all over the Gentile world, right? So here we see that Greeks are coming to Jesus, and they're doing that. And so Jesus says, of course, "I'm that seed that falls in the ground." And he basically says that the son must be lifted up, right? That not only is he going in the ground to grow, but he will he will draw people unto himself. And so we can see he goes in this kind of discourse about his people will be called by his name. His people will follow his word. When people see him, they don't see him, they see God. When people hear him, they don't hear Jesus, they hear God. And basically saying that he is being lifted up, he is being like God. And eventually, in a little over a week, he is going to be ultimately lifted up, ascended up to God. And so we can see this whole chapter is giving so much prophecy of something that's going to happen in literally, 7 days, 8 days away. So pretty amazing. But what's amazing is kind of that last little part of John 12, and the people that have heard this, they've seen Lazarus, they even heard the audible voice of God saying that he was his son multiple times at his baptism, and then right here in chapter 12. And notice, people still don't believe, right? And we always ask ourselves as Christians, how come people don't believe? How come my friends won't believe? How come my family won't believe? These people heard Jesus, they saw Jesus, they heard him teach, they heard literally the audible voice of God, but yet they still did not believe. And that's just amazing, right? It takes true belief, true faith, that there is a God and that he gave his son Jesus on the cross. And even at that, people still did not believe. Guys, I hope this is going well for you, and I hope you're understanding and loving the book of John like I am. And we will see you tomorrow. God bless.